The Devil's Hour. This is a true story. It happened to me when I was 14 years old on a highway in Mexico at exactly 3:42 in the morning. I remember the exact time because I was staring at the clock on the dashboard when everything changed, watching the green digital numbers tick forward second by second, minute by minute, as if time itself had become something tangible, something dangerous, something that was counting down toward a moment I could not escape. And if you are driving alone right now, if you are listening to this while the road stretches empty ahead of you, and the darkness presses against your windows like something hungry, trying to find a way inside, like something patient and ancient and infinitely cruel waiting for you to make a single mistake, maybe you should pull over. Find a gas station, a rest stop. A parking lot outside a 24-hour convenience store where the fluorescent lights hum overhead and tired clerks stand behind bulletproof glass and the world still makes sense. Anywhere with lights and people and the comfortable noise of ordinary life. Wait until you have finished hearing what I have to say, because after tonight, you will never look at an empty highway the same way again. You will never trust the dark spaces between streetlights, those pools of shadow that seem to move when you are not looking directly at them, that seem to contain shapes that should not exist. You will never feel safe in your car when the clock ticks past midnight and the world outside becomes something else entirely, something older and stranger and more dangerous than anything you learned about in school. And you will never ever stop for anyone between 3 and 4 in the morning, no matter how much they cry, no matter how much they beg. No matter how young they look or how familiar their voice sounds when they call your name through the glass that separates you from the darkness outside. I learned this lesson the hard way. I carry the proof on my body written in scar tissue that will never fade, that reminds me every single day of what happened on that highway, of what I saw, of what touched me in ways that no doctor could ever understand or explain. 3 parallel scars running from my elbow to my wrist, deep enough that the emergency room doctors asked what kind of animal had attacked me, deep enough that I could see white bone gleaming through the torn flesh when it first happened, deep enough that the nurses exchanged worried glances over my bed when they thought I was unconscious from the pain medication, whispering words like infection and nerve damage and permanent disability and things we cannot explain. I told them it was a stray cat, a big one, feral. Living in the hills outside the city, gone wild and dangerous after years without human contact. They did not believe me. I could see the doubt in their eyes, the suspicion, the certainty that I was hiding something, that no cat could make wounds like this, that something else must have happened, something I was too scared or too traumatized to admit. But they did not ask again. Perhaps they sensed that some truths are better left unexplored. Perhaps they understood on some deep instinctive level that bypassed their medical training and their rational minds that the real answer would be worse than anything they could imagine. Perhaps they looked at those wounds and felt something cold crawl up their spines and knew without knowing how they knew that there are things in this world that medicine cannot explain and science cannot measure and rational thought cannot protect you from. The scars are white now, raised like ridges on a topographical map marking territory. I never wanted to explore territory that belongs to something else, something that claimed me on that highway and has never fully let me go. They healed years ago, or at least they appeared to have healed. The skin closed over the wounds. The constant throbbing pain faded to a dull, occasional ache. The doctors declared me recovered, signed their discharge papers, sent me home with bottles of antibiotics and rolls of bandages, and printed instructions about wound care that I followed religiously, even though I knew somehow that ordinary medicine was not what I needed. But every year on that exact date, the anniversary of the night everything changed, the scars bleed. Fresh blood seeping through skin that closed long ago, welling up from somewhere deep beneath the surface, soaking through my shirt before I even realize what is happening, dripping onto whatever surface I happen to be near. and leaving stains that never quite wash out, no matter how hard I scrub. The first time it happened exactly 1 year after that night. I thought I had somehow reopened the wounds in my sleep, torn them apart with unconscious thrashing during a nightmare I could not remember. I rushed to the bathroom in a panic, terrified, expecting to find my arm torn open again, expecting to see bone and muscle and the dark, terrible things that live beneath our skin. But the scars were intact, sealed, healed. Smooth white ridges of tissue that showed no sign of damage, no indication that anything was wrong. And yet the blood kept coming, welling up from somewhere the doctors could not reach, somewhere that existed in a space between the physical world and whatever lies beyond it, somewhere that belonged to the thing that had marked me on that highway 10 years ago and would never truly let me go. I went to specialists, dermatologists who examined my skin under magnifying glasses and ultraviolet lights, surgeons who offered to cut out the scar tissue entirely and see what lay beneath. Researchers at a university hospital who had heard about my case through channels I never fully understood and wanted to study me, to run tests, to try to explain something that had no explanation. They found nothing. No medical reason for healthy scar tissue to spontaneously hemorrhage once a year, always on the same date, always beginning at exactly 3 in the morning and stopping at exactly 4. They called it an anomaly, a mystery. A fascinating case study that might warrant further investigation. Something that should not be possible but was happening anyway, defying everything they thought they knew about how the human body worked. They wrote papers about me, I think, published their findings in journals with names I could not pronounce, presented my case at conferences where other doctors shook their heads and muttered about statistical impossibilities and unknown variables and the limitations of current medical understanding. They did not have an explanation, but I did. I knew exactly why the scars bled. I knew exactly what had caused them. And I knew that no amount of medicine or surgery or rational explanation would ever make them stop. Because the thing that marked me was not of this world, and marks from that place do not heal. Not really. Not completely. Not ever. Let me tell you what happened. My father was a driver. Not just any driver, not just someone who happened to operate vehicles for a living to pay the bills and put food on the table, but a driver in the truest and deepest sense of the word. He had spent his entire life behind the wheel, had logged more kilometers on Mexican highways than most people would travel in 10 lifetimes, had worn grooves into steering wheels with his calloused hands and memorized every curve and straightaway and dangerous intersection on roads that stretched from one end of the country to the other. The highway was not just his workplace, it was his home, his calling, the place where he felt most alive, most himself, most connected to something larger than the ordinary world of houses and offices and the small, contained spaces where most people spent their lives. He started young, barely 18 years old, fresh out of school, with no money and no prospects and no plan except the desperate need to survive in a world that did not care whether he succeeded or failed. He found work piloting taxis through the chaotic streets of Mexico City, learning to navigate the impossible traffic that moved like a living thing, like a creature made of metal and exhaust, and the combined frustration of millions of people trying to get somewhere else. He learned to read the flow of cars, the way a fisherman reads currents, anticipating movements before they happened, finding gaps that should not have existed, threading his vehicle through spaces that seemed too small, until suddenly they were not. He learned to deal with the aggressive drivers who treated every intersection like a battle to be won, with the pedestrians who stepped into traffic without looking, as if death were merely an inconvenience, with the police officers who expected bribes and the criminals who expected compliance, and the 1,000 other dangers that came with working the streets of one of the largest cities on earth. He moved on to cargo trucks in his 20s, hauling goods across state lines, driving through the night to meet impossible deadlines that companies set without any concern for the humans who would have to fulfill them. He learned the weight of responsibility that came with carrying other people's property, the constant awareness that a single mistake could destroy merchandise worth more than he would earn in a decade, the pressure of knowing that his livelihood depended on arriving on time every time, no matter what obstacles the road put in his way. He learned to push his body past exhaustion, to stay awake when every cell screamed for sleep, to keep the wheels turning through rain and fog and the kind of darkness that seemed to swallow the headlights whole. Then came the long-distance buses, those massive coaches that carried passengers from Tijuana to Cancun and everywhere in between, journeys that could take days of continuous travel that required a special kind of endurance most people could not imagine. He was responsible for lives now, not just cargo. Dozens of people sleeping in the seats behind him, trusting him completely, putting their safety in his hands without ever thinking about what that meant. He learned to drive with supernatural smoothness, to take curves so gently that sleeping passengers did not stir, to brake so gradually that no one ever felt the deceleration. He became a master of the long haul, of the endless hours of highway hypnosis, of the discipline required to stay focused when the road stretched ahead like an infinite ribbon of gray, and the miles blurred together into a single, continuous, present moment. And finally, in his 40s, he became a private driver for wealthy businessmen who needed discretion and reliability above all else. Men who made deals that could not be discussed. Men who traveled at strange hours to strange places for reasons they never explained. Men who paid premium rates for a driver they could trust with their schedules and their secrets, and sometimes with their lives. My father asked no questions. He drove where they told him. He waited as long as they needed. And he never ever spoke about what he saw or heard during those jobs, not to my mother, not to me, not to anyone. He understood that some knowledge came with obligations, that some secrets were worth keeping. That the line between knowing too much and knowing just enough was thin and dangerous and easy to cross by accident. He knew every road in Mexico the way most people know the rooms in their own homes. He could tell you where the potholes were on Highway 57, the ones that had been there for a decade because the local government never had the budget to fix them, the ones that could destroy a suspension or blow out a tire if you hit them at the wrong speed. He could tell you which curves on the mountain roads near Oaxaca would kill you if you took them too fast. Which ones looked gentle but actually camouflaged drops that had claimed dozens of lives over the years, sending vehicles tumbling down slopes where they would not be found for days or weeks or sometimes ever. He could tell you which gas stations had clean bathrooms and fresh coffee and attendants who would watch your vehicle while you grabbed a few hours of sleep in the parking lot, and which ones you should avoid no matter how low your fuel gauge dropped, the ones where the lights flickered too often and the attendants had empty eyes that never quite focused on your face, and the other customers always seemed to be watching you, waiting for something, expecting something that you did not want to give. He knew the roads the way a sailor knows the sea, with respect and familiarity and a healthy awareness of how quickly things could go wrong, of how the same highway that carried you safely 1,000 times could betray you on the 1,001st, of how the margin between a safe journey and a fatal disaster was often no wider than a moment's inattention or a single degree of steering wheel turned at the wrong time. He had seen accidents that would haunt a normal person forever, had been among the first to arrive at crash sites, where the twisted metal still smoked and the blood still pooled on the pavement, and the sounds of suffering filled the night air with a music no one should ever have to hear. He had helped pull survivors from wreckage, had held the hands of dying strangers while waiting for ambulances that always seemed to take too long, had spoken the last words that some people ever heard because there was no one else there to speak them. The road had shown him things, taught him things, changed him in ways that he never talked about but that I could sometimes see in his eyes, a distance, a wariness, a knowledge that the world was more fragile and more dangerous than most people ever realized. His hands were calloused from decades of gripping steering wheels, the skin thick and rough and permanently shaped by the tools of his trade. His eyes had permanent creases around them, deep lines carved by years of squinting through windshields into the glare of oncoming headlights, by decades of staring into darkness for hours, waiting for the sun to rise and make the world safe again. He could predict weather by signs that no meteorologist would recognize, could tell you when rain was coming by. The way the air smelled, could feel changes in barometric pressure in his joints and his sinuses long before any storm appeared on the horizon. He could diagnose engine problems just by listening, could hear the slight irregularity in the rhythm of pistons and valves that told him something was wrong before any warning light flickered on the dashboard, could keep vehicles running long past the point when they should have died through a combination of skill and intuition and what he called listening to what the machine was telling you. He was the most practical man I ever knew. He believed in things he could see and touch and measure and fix with his own hands. He believed in physics and mechanics and the predictable behavior of well-maintained machines. He believed that every problem had a solution if you were willing to work hard enough to find it, that every mystery would eventually yield to patient investigation, that the universe operated according to rules that could be learned and understood and used to your advantage if you paid attention and kept your head and did not let fear cloud your judgment. My father used to say he did not believe in ghosts. He would say it with a slight smile, a dismissive wave of his calloused hand, a tone of gentle condescension reserved for superstitions and fairy tales, and the comfortable lies that weak people told themselves to make the darkness feel less frightening. Every strange thing has a rational explanation, he would tell me when I was young and scared and looking for reassurance that the shadows in my room were not watching me. Every shadow is just a trick of the light refracted through curtains or reflected off windows or created by objects that your half-asleep brain cannot quite identify. Every sound in the night is just an animal going about its business, or the wind finding gaps in the construction, or the house settling into its foundations the way all houses do. We evolved to be paranoid, he explained, because the paranoid ones survived. Our ancestors who jumped at every sound and fled from every shadow lived long enough to have children, while the brave ones who investigated strange noises ended up as meals for predators. But that does not mean the shadows are real. It just means our fear is older than our logic. Understand the fear, and you can control it. Understand where it comes from, and you can decide whether it is useful or just a remnant of a past that no longer applies. He said these things with such certainty, such absolute confidence, that I believed him completely. How could I not? He was my father. He was the man who knew everything, who could fix anything, who had traveled more miles and seen more of the world than anyone else I had ever met. He was the man who had never shown fear in his entire life, who faced every challenge with calm competence, who made the impossible seem routine through sheer force of will and accumulated skill. If he said ghosts were not real, then ghosts were not real. If he said there was nothing to fear in the darkness, then there was nothing to fear. His word was law. His judgment was final. His understanding of the world was the foundation on which I built my own understanding. But even as a child, even when I still believed everything he told me without question, I noticed that his actions did not always match his words. I noticed the small contradictions, the tiny inconsistencies that did not make sense if he truly believed what he claimed to believe. He refused to drive after 2 in the morning no matter what. He turned down jobs that would have paid double or triple his normal rate, walking away from money. Our family needed money that could have made our lives easier without offering any explanation beyond a terse, "I do not work those hours." When clients pushed back, when they offered more money, when they pleaded or threatened or promised consequences for his refusal, he simply repeated himself, "I do not work those hours. Period. End of discussion. No negotiation possible." He kept a small canvas bag in his truck that he never let anyone touch, a worn old thing with a drawstring at the top that clinked softly when it moved, a bag that he checked every time he got in the vehicle, and every time he got out, a bag that he kept within arm's reach at all times, as if it contained something precious, something essential, something he could not afford to be without. He never told me what was in it, never explained why he carried it, never acknowledged that it existed at all except through the constant vigilance with which he protected it. And sometimes when he came home from late jobs that had run longer than expected, his face had a pallor that no amount of fatigue could explain, a grayness around his eyes that went beyond simple tiredness, a tremor in his hands that he tried to hide but could not quite control. A look in his eyes that I recognized but could not name, a look that I would later understand was the look of a man who had seen something that shook him to his core, something that challenged everything he thought he knew, something he was still trying to convince himself had not really happened. He would sit in the kitchen and drink coffee and stare at the wall until the clock showed 4 in the morning, and only then would he go to bed. Only then would his shoulders relax. Only then would the color start to return to his face. He never explained what he was waiting for, never told me why 4 o'clock was significant, never admitted that anything was wrong at all. I did not understand these contradictions until much later, until the night he finally told me the truth, until I learned that my father had not always been afraid of the dark. That something had happened to him when he was 20 years old. Something on a lonely highway in the dead of night. Something that had transformed him from a skeptic into a believer, from a man who trusted nothing but logic into a man who kept holy water and salt hidden in his truck. Something that had taught him rules he would eventually pass on to me. Rules that saved my life. Rules that I still follow today, more than 2 decades later, because I know what happens when you break them. I know what waits on the other side of that door. I know what hunts in the darkness between 3 and 4 in the morning, in the hour that does not belong to us, in the time when the world becomes something else, and the things that walk the roads are not always what they appear to be. I was 14 years old, and I wanted nothing more than to be exactly like him. From the time I could walk, I was obsessed with cars and trucks and motorcycles and anything else that had wheels and an engine and the promise of motion. Every birthday, every Christmas, every report card that showed grades good enough to earn a reward, I asked for the same gifts. Toy cars in every size and color, from tiny Hot Wheels that fit in my palm to elaborate remote-controlled trucks that I would drive around the backyard for hours, creating imaginary delivery routes, pretending I was hauling cargo across the country the way my father did. Model trucks that I assembled with painstaking care, following the instructions exactly, painting each piece by hand with the tiny brushes and model paints that my mother bought for me at the hobby shop, displaying the finished products on shelves in my room like trophies from races I had won. Plastic steering wheels with buttons that made engine sounds and horn noises, and the screech of brake steering wheels that I would attach to chairs in the living room so I could pretend I was driving to distant cities, to places I had only seen in photographs, to the magical destinations that appeared on the signs my father passed every day. While other kids my age were starting to care about video games and sports and the complicated social dynamics of early adolescence, I spent my weekends in the garage with my father. I would stand beside him while he changed oil and rotated tires and performed the 100 small maintenance tasks that kept his truck running smoothly. I would hand him tools when he asked for them, learning the names of each one, learning their purposes, learning the feel of a properly tightened bolt and the sound of a well-tuned engine. I would sit on an overturned bucket and watch him work, absorbing knowledge through observation the way children do, learning without even realizing I was learning, building a foundation of practical skills that would serve me for the rest of my life. I knew the difference between a flathead screwdriver and a Phillips head before I learned my multiplication tables. I could identify the sound of a failing alternator before I could identify the flags of foreign countries. I understood the importance of checking your mirrors and your blind spots before I understood the importance of checking your homework. My grandfather had been a driver too, and his father before him, and his father before that, going back generations, back to a time when roads were dirt and vehicles were rare, and a man who could drive was a man who could go anywhere, do anything, escape any problem that became too big to solve. It was in our blood, this love of the road, this need to be in motion, this restlessness that made staying in one place feel like a kind of slow suffocation. We were nomads by nature, my family wanderers and travelers and seekers, even when circumstances forced us to stay put. The road called to us in a voice that other people could not hear. The highway sang to us in a language that other people could not understand. And we answered that call generation after generation because to ignore it would have meant denying something fundamental about who we were. My mother worried about it sometimes. She came from different stock, from a family of shopkeepers and teachers and civil servants, people who built their lives in one place and stayed there, who watched the world come to them instead of going out to meet it. She had married my father knowing what he was, loving him because of it, as much as despite it, but she worried about me following the same path. She wanted me to have options, she would say during quiet conversations when my father was away on jobs, and it was just the two of us in the kitchen. She wanted me to go to college, to get a degree, to become a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer or anything that would give me stability, security, a life that did not involve spending weeks away from home and sleeping in truck stops and aging 10 years for every 5 that passed. She wanted me to have choices that my father had never had, to escape the gravitational pull of the highway that had captured every man in our family for as long as anyone could remember. But she never tried to stop me. She never forbade me from going to the garage or learning about engines or dreaming about the day when I would have my own truck and my own roots and my own place in the family tradition. She understood that some things are inherited, passed down through generations, like the color of your eyes or the shape of your nose or the particular way you hold your shoulders when you are thinking hard about something. She understood that fighting against nature was exhausting and ultimately futile, that you could not turn a river by standing in its path. And perhaps, though she never said it directly, she understood something else as well. Perhaps she knew that the knowledge my father carried, the terrible knowledge about what walked the roads in the darkest hours, would need to be passed on to someone. Perhaps she knew that I would face the same dangers he had faced, that the road would test me the same way it had tested him, and when that day came, I would need to know the rules. I would need to know how to survive. There were signs of the truth looking back. Small incidents and observations that I noticed but explained away because I was young, and because my father had taught me too well to be rational, too well to believe in things that could not be measured and documented and reproduced under laboratory conditions. I remember the first time I saw him refuse a job that should have been impossible to refuse. A wealthy client called our house at 11 o'clock on a Friday night, someone whose name I recognized from television and newspapers, someone with enough money to buy anything and enough power to make problems disappear. He needed an emergency drive to Monterey, several hundred kilometers away, and he was offering triple my father's usual rate. Triple the money for a single night's work, more than my father typically earned in an entire week of jobs. My father listened to the offer on the kitchen phone while I sat at the table pretending to do homework, but actually eavesdropping on every word. He nodded along as the man spoke, asked clarifying questions about pickup times and destinations, grabbed a pen and started writing down details on the notepad my mother kept by the phone. Everything about his body language suggested he was going to accept. This was easy money. This was the kind of job drivers dreamed about. And then, to my complete astonishment, he shook his head, even though the man on the other end of the phone could not see the gesture. "I do not drive after 2 in the morning," he said. His voice was calm, polite, but absolutely firm in a way that allowed no negotiation. No matter what you pay, the client argued, Even from across the kitchen, I could hear his voice through the phone, raised in frustration, sharp with the incredulity of a man who was not used to hearing the word no. He pleaded. He cajoled. He offered more money 4 times the rate, 5 times amounts that made my eyes go wide with disbelief. He made vague references to consequences to relationships with other wealthy clients, to the ways that refusing this particular request might affect my father's future business opportunities. My father listened to all of it without changing his expression. And when the man had finally exhausted himself, had run out of arguments and threats and bribes, my father simply said, "I understand your position, sir, but my answer is the same. I do not drive after 2 in the morning. I wish you luck finding someone else." And he hung up the phone. I stared at him, struggling to understand what had just happened. We needed that money. My mother had been talking just last week about the bills that were piling up, about the repairs the house needed, about how we might have to cut back on things if work did not pick up soon. And here was my father turning down more money than we usually saw in a month, turning it down without hesitation, turning it down for a reason he would not explain. Why, I finally asked when the silence became too heavy to bear. He looked at me for a long moment, his eyes searching my face, as if he was trying to decide something, weighing options I could not see. "You will understand someday," he said finally. And that was all he would say about it. The second sign came a few months later on a night that started ordinary and ended with questions I would not be able to answer for years. I was up late studying for an important exam, sitting at the kitchen table with my textbooks spread around me and careful piles, highlighters and note cards and scratch paper scattered across every available surface. The house was quiet the way it only got late at night, my mother asleep in the back bedroom. The neighborhood outside wrapped in the particular silence of a residential street after midnight. The only sounds were the scratch of my pencil, the rustle of pages turning, and the occasional creak of the old house settling into its foundations the way old houses do. I looked at the clock on the wall, 2:23 in the morning. I'd been studying for hours, had pushed through exhaustion and boredom and the desperate desire to give up and go to bed because the exam was in less than 6 hours and the material still was not sticking in my head, and I had no choice but to keep pushing, keep reading, keep hoping that something would click before dawn. I heard his truck pull into the driveway, the familiar rumble of the diesel engine that I could identify from a block away, the squeak of brakes that he kept meaning to fix but never quite got around to, the crunch of gravel under tires as he maneuvered into his usual parking spot beside the house. I checked the clock again. 2:27 now. Strange. He had left for what was supposed to be a simple job, a short pickup and delivery that should have had him home by midnight at the very latest. A 3-hour job that had somehow stretched to nearly 7. I heard the front door open and I looked up, ready to wave at him, ready to complain about how difficult my exam was going to be, ready to engage in the normal ritual of a son acknowledging his father's return from work. The greeting died in my throat. His face was pale. Not the pale of simple tiredness of a man who needed sleep and coffee and a few hours of rest. Not the pale of illness, of fever or flu or something that antibiotics and bed rest could cure. This was something else entirely. This was the pale of fear. Real fear. The kind of fear that I had only seen in movies before, the kind that drained every drop of color from a person's skin and left them looking like a corpse that had not yet realized it was dead. His eyes were wide, the white showing all around the irises, the look of a hunted animal that had only barely escaped the predator at its heels. His hands were shaking as he closed the door behind him, shaking so badly that he needed 3 tries to engage the lock. My mother appeared from the bedroom, somehow sensing that something was wrong, despite having been deeply asleep only moments before. She was wrapping her robe around herself, her hair tangled from the pillow, her eyes still clouded with sleep. But when she saw my father's face, when she registered the pallor and the trembling and the look in his eyes, the sleep vanished instantly. Her expression sharpened into something I had never seen before, a combination of fear and understanding and what might have been resignation. "What happened?" she asked. Her voice was carefully controlled, artificially calm, the voice of someone trying very hard not to make a bad situation worse. "Nothing," my father said. But the word cracked as he spoke it, splitting down the middle like a piece of rotten wood, betraying the lie even as it left his mouth. "Nothing! I made it back in time. That is all that matters. I made it back. Made it back from what in time for what? What had been chasing him, and why did it matter that he had outrun it? The questions piled up in my mind, crowding against each other, demanding answers that I knew instinctively I was not going to get. Something in his eyes told me not to ask. Something in the way my mother nodded slowly and gravely as if she understood exactly what he meant, even though he had barely said anything. This was a language I did not speak, a conversation that operated on frequencies I could not detect. There was something happening between my parents that went beyond the words they were exchanging. Something rooted in shared knowledge and shared experience that excluded me completely. I went back to my books and pretended I had not seen anything. Pretended to study while actually watching my father from the corner of my eye, trying to understand what had happened to him, trying to reconcile the terrified man who had just walked through the door with the calm, confident father I had known my entire life. He sat down at the table across from me, not speaking, not acknowledging my presence, just staring at the wall with unfocused eyes. But I noticed the way he kept looking at the clock, watching the minutes tick by with an intensity that made no sense, tracking the passage of time as if it were the only thing in the world that mattered, as if each second that elapsed was a small victory against something I could not see. 2:30 became 2:45. 2:45 became 3 o'clock. And at that precise moment, something changed in my father's body. His shoulders, which had been hunched up near his ears with tension, slowly began to relax, lowering by degrees until they reached their normal position. His hands, which had been clenched into white-knuckled fists on the table, gradually uncurled the fingers, loosening the tendons, releasing their death grip. The color began to return to his face, seeping back into his cheeks, like water being absorbed by dry earth after a long drought. He took a deep breath. The first full, unrestricted breath I had heard him take since he walked through the door. He held it for a moment, then let it out slowly, deliberately, as if he were releasing something more than just air. The clock continued its march. 3:15, 3:30, 3:45. My father remained at the table, still watching the clock, still waiting for something. But with each passing minute his body relaxed a little more. His expression softened a little further, his breathing grew a little easier. And when 4 o'clock finally arrived, something shifted. The tension drained out of the room like water through a sieve. My father stood up, walked to the refrigerator, poured himself a glass of water, and drank it in one long swallow. Then he looked at me with something approaching his normal expression and said, "You should get some sleep, mijo. Big exam tomorrow." As if nothing had happened. As if I had not just watched him spend 90 minutes in rigid, terrified silence waiting for a deadline I did not understand, fighting a battle against an enemy I could not see. As if the fear that had transformed his face was just a bad dream, an illusion, a thing that had never existed at all. I did not sleep that night. I lay in my bed, staring at the ceiling, watching the shadows move across the plaster as car headlights swept past outside, trying to understand what I had witnessed, trying to find a rational explanation that would make the world make sense again. My father did not believe in ghosts. He did not believe in the supernatural. He believed in logic and evidence and things that could be measured and explained. So what had scared him so badly that he could not stop shaking? What had he been running from when he came through the door? What was so significant about the hour between 3 and 4 in the morning? I did not find answers. Not that night. Not for a long time after. But I remembered. The third sign was something I found rather than witnessed, a discovery that raised more questions than it answered, that added another layer to the mystery my father seemed determined to keep secret. It happened a few weeks after the night he came home terrified on an ordinary afternoon that gave no warning of what I was about to uncover. I was looking for a flashlight in my father's truck. We were going camping the following weekend, a father-son trip into the mountains that we had been planning for months, and I wanted to make sure we had all the equipment we would need. My father was in the house taking a shower, and I had offered to check the truck's emergency supplies to inventory what we had and make a list of what we still needed to buy. I opened the passenger door and climbed inside immediately, surrounded by the familiar smell of my father's truck. That particular combination of diesel fuel and coffee, and the leather conditioner he used on the seats. I checked the glove compartment first, finding the usual collection of registration papers and insurance documents and the small first aid kit he always kept within reach. I moved to the center console, finding maps and sunglasses and a collection of pens that had accumulated over years of paperwork. I checked beneath the seats, reaching into the dark spaces where things collected and were forgotten. My hand closed around something unexpected. A bag, small, made of old canvas, worn soft by years of handling, a drawstring pulled tight at the top. It was pushed far back beneath the driver's seat, wedged into a corner where it would not be noticed during casual inspection, hidden in a way that suggested it was not meant to be found. I pulled it out, curiosity overriding caution. I should have left it alone. Should have pushed it back where I found it and pretended I had never seen it. But I was 14 years old and full of the certainty that I had a right to know everything, that secrets kept from me were somehow unjust, that the mysteries my father guarded were meant to be solved. I loosened the drawstring and looked inside. Salt. A substantial bag of coarse salt, the kind used for cooking or preserving food or melting ice on winter sidewalks. Not a restaurant packet, not a small shaker you might keep for seasoning food on the road. A real bag, 1/2 kilogram or more, as if my father expected to need a significant quantity at some point. A small glass bottle filled with clear liquid. The bottle was old, the glass thick and slightly warped in the way of handmade things, the stopper made of cork rather than modern plastic. There was no label, no indication of what the liquid might be. Water, I assumed, though I could not imagine why anyone would keep water in a bottle like this, hidden away like something precious, stored with such obvious care. A wooden cross, small enough to fit in the palm of my hand. The wood was dark with age, worn smooth by years of handling, the edges rounded and soft from being touched over and over again. It looked old, genuinely old, like something that had been made generations ago and passed down through a family, accumulating prayers and devotion with each hand that held it. And at the very bottom of the bag, beneath everything else, a photograph. Faded and creased, the colors washed out by time and light, the edges soft from years of handling. It showed a young man standing beside a car, a vehicle that looked like it was from the 1970s, based on the styling, all curves and chrome in the fashion of that era. The young man was smiling, but there was something in his eyes that did not match the smile. Something knowing, something sad, something that suggested he understood things most people never learned, things he wished he did not know. I did not recognize him, did not know if he was family or friend or simply someone my father had known long ago. But there was something about his face that unsettled me. Something that made me want to look away, even as I found myself unable to stop staring. I heard footsteps approaching outside, the crunch of gravel that meant my father was coming. I shoved everything back into the bag as quickly as I could, my heart pounding with the irrational fear of a child caught doing something forbidden. I pushed the bag back under the seat, wedging it into the same corner where I had found it. I grabbed a flashlight from the glove compartment, something I actually had a reason to be holding, and by the time my father reached the truck, I was sitting innocently in the passenger seat, examining the batteries. "What are you doing?" he asked. His voice was casual, but I saw his eyes flick to the space beneath the driver's seat, checking, confirming, making sure his secrets were still safe. Looking for the flashlight, I said, holding up my prize. Wanted to make sure we have everything for the camping trip. He nodded, apparently satisfied. But as I climbed out of the truck to let him in, he said something that I didn't understand at the time. "That bag under the seat," he said, "emergency supplies, just in case." I had not mentioned the bag, had not given any indication that I knew it existed. But somehow he knew that I had found it. Somehow he could tell. I waited for him to explain. To tell me what kind of emergency required salt and holy water and a photograph of a young man I'd never seen. But he just climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine, and the moment passed, and the questions remained unanswered. I was not ready to know. He was not ready to tell me. But the time was coming. The time was coming very soon. The night everything changed started like any other. It was the summer I turned 14, the long, golden months between school years when time moved differently, when every day stretched out like taffy and every week felt like a lifetime. My father had finally agreed after months of begging and pleading and promises of good behavior to let me come with him on a real long-distance job. Not just a quick trip around the city, not just an errand that would be over in a few hours. A proper long-haul drive, the kind he had been doing for decades. The kind I had been dreaming about since I was old enough to understand what my father did for a living. A wealthy family was relocating from Mexico City to Guanajuato and needed their furniture and belongings transported. They had hired my father through word of mouth, through the network of wealthy people who passed recommendations among themselves like secret passwords because someone had assured them that he was reliable and careful and would treat their expensive possessions as if they were his own. Good money, my father told me when he explained the job. Easy work. We would drive there in the morning, help load the truck, and be back home by early evening. Simple, safe. A good first experience for a boy who wanted to learn the family trade. I remember how excited I was. I could barely sleep the night before, lying in my bed staring at the ceiling while my mind raced with anticipation. This was it. This was the beginning, the first real step on the road that I believed would define my entire future. Tomorrow I would sit in the passenger seat of my father's truck and watch the world go by and learn the secrets of the highway that he had accumulated over decades of driving. Tomorrow, I would start to become the man I wanted to be. My father let me sit in the front seat in what he called the navigator's position, the place where his co-pilot would sit if he had one, the place reserved for the person he trusted most in the world. I felt the weight of that honor settling onto my young shoulders as I climbed into the cab and pulled the door shut behind me. I sat up straighter than usual, trying to look older than I was, trying to prove that I deserved to be there. My mother came out to say goodbye while we were doing final checks on the truck. She hugged me the way she always did, but there was something different about it this time. She held me longer than usual, tighter. Her arms trembled slightly against my back in a way that I did not understand. When she finally released me, her eyes were wet with tears she was trying not to let fall. She pressed something into my hand, a chain thin and delicate with a small silver cross hanging from it. The metal was warm from being held in her palm. "This was your grandmother's," she said. Her voice was steady, carefully controlled, but I could hear the emotion underneath. She wore it every day of her life. She believed it kept her safe. "I want you to wear it now. Do not take it off. No matter what happens tonight, no matter what you see or hear or think you need to do, keep this on. Promise me." I promised, confused and a little frightened by the intensity of her request. This was more than just a family heirloom being passed down. This was something else, something urgent, something that felt like a warning. She looked at my father over my shoulder, and something passed between them. Some communication that did not require words, built on 25 years of marriage and shared secrets I was not part of. "We will be back before 2, my father said. His voice was firm and confident, the voice of a man making a promise he fully intended to keep. I planned everything carefully. We have plenty of time. My mother nodded slowly, but the worry did not leave her eyes. I watched her standing in the doorway as we drove away, her figure growing smaller in the side mirror until we turned a corner and she disappeared entirely. The morning sun was bright and warm, the sky was blue and cloudless, and I had no idea that I was driving toward the night that would change everything. The drive to Guanajuato was exactly what I had always imagined it would be. The morning light painted the mountains in shades of gold and amber colors so vivid they seemed almost artificial, too beautiful to be part of the ordinary world I had always known. The highway unrolled ahead of us like a gray ribbon leading to adventure, and I watched the landscape change through the window with the wonder of someone seeing familiar things for the first time. We passed through small towns that looked like they had not changed in 100 years. Old women in colorful dresses sold fruit from wooden stands on the sidewalk. Children in school uniforms walked in groups, laughing and pushing each other the way children everywhere do. Dogs slept in patches of sunlight, too lazy to move even when trucks rumbled past a few meters away. We climbed into mountains where the air grew cool and thin and smelled like pine needles and wood smoke. We descended into valleys where farmers worked fields that had been cultivated by their families for generations. Their movements slow and patient, connected to rhythms of planting and harvest that had not changed since their great-great-grandparents worked the same soil. My father talked as he drove. He told me stories about the roads we traveled, about adventures he had on this highway, and mishaps he had survived on that one. He pointed out landmarks and explained their significance, sharing the accumulated knowledge of decades behind the wheel. He taught me how to read the traffic patterns ahead, how to anticipate what other drivers were going to do before they did it, how to spot the warning signs of mechanical trouble in other vehicles. He bought us coffee at a gas station run by an old friend, and I listened to them trade stories and complaints and jokes while I sipped my drink and felt impossibly grown up and proud to be there. We arrived in Guanajuato right on schedule just after noon. The apartment building where we were making the delivery was new construction, all glass and steel and sharp modern angles that clashed with the colonial architecture of the surrounding neighborhood. Security guards checked our papers at the gate with suspicious thoroughness. Cameras blinked at us from every corner, recording our presence, noting our license plates. We parked in the underground garage and waited for someone to authorize our entry into the building so we could begin unloading. And we waited. And we waited. The building manager was not answering his phone. The family was delayed by traffic, by complications, by the 1,000 small disasters that seem to multiply whenever you are trying to accomplish something important on a deadline. I watched my father grow more and more agitated as the hours passed. He checked his watch constantly, calculating and recalculating, doing math in his head that seemed to produce results he did not like. 3 hours passed before everything was finally sorted out and we could begin work. 3 hours that we could not afford to lose. 3 hours that would push our return journey into territory my father clearly wanted to avoid. We worked faster than I had ever seen my father work. He directed everything with military precision, telling the movers exactly where to place each item, exactly how to stack the boxes, wasting no motion and allowing no delays. I helped wherever I could, carrying smaller items, holding doors, doing anything that might save a few seconds. The apartment was huge, filled with expensive furniture and artwork, and all the accumulated possessions of a wealthy family, and getting everything loaded properly took far longer than any of us had hoped. By the time we finished, the sun had set and the city lights were coming on across the valley. My father looked at his watch one more time, and the expression on his face told me everything I needed to know. We were in trouble. We were not going to make it home before the deadline. He had set the mysterious deadline that had something to do with 2 in the morning, and the fear I had seen in his eyes that night weeks ago. "We should eat," he said, as we climbed back into the truck. His voice was artificially calm, but I could hear the tension underneath. "There is a place I know. Good food, fast service. We will be quick." The restaurant was a small taqueria that looked like nothing from the outside, but turned out to serve some of the best food I had ever tasted. The owner knew my father embraced him warmly, led us to a quiet table in the back. Food appeared almost immediately, plate after plate of delicious things that I barely tasted because I was too busy watching my father watch the clock. When we had eaten enough to satisfy minimum requirements, when he could not justify staying any longer, he leaned forward and began to speak. "There are things I need to tell you," he said. "Things about driving at night. Things I hoped you would never need to know." And then he told me everything. About the girl in white he had seen when he was 20 years old. About her face changing, her eyes becoming black holes, her hand reaching through solid glass to touch his cheek. About the rules his father had taught him, rules passed down through generations of drivers who knew what walked the highways in the darkest hours. About the hour of the devil, the time between 3 and 4 in the morning when the barrier between worlds grew thin and things crossed over that did not belong. Never stop for anyone, he said. Never open the door. Never look into their eyes. Never speak to them. He explained what the things were. Some were ghost spirits of people who had died on these roads and did not know they were dead, standing by the highway waiting for rides that would never come. Others were something else entirely, creatures that had never been human, that wore human shapes the way we might wear costumes, that hunted for something they could only find in living souls. He told me about his friend. A man who had broken the first rule, who had stopped for someone who seemed to need help. They found his truck the next morning. Engine running, door open, no body, nothing but scratch marks on the inside of the roof. By the time he finished, the clock showed after 11. We had hours of driving ahead of us, and no way to make it home before the dangerous time began. "We need to go," he said. "If we are still on the road when 3 o'clock comes, you follow the rules, no matter what you see, no matter what you hear." The drive that followed was unlike anything I had experienced. The highway that had seemed so normal during the day became something else entirely at night. The darkness pressed against the windows like something solid, something with weight and presence, something that wanted to get inside. The headlights carved a tunnel through the black, revealing only the road immediately ahead, leaving everything else hidden in shadows that seemed to move and shift at the edge of vision. Strange things began to happen almost immediately. The radio filled with static that sounded like whispers. My phone showed impossible times before settling back to normal. The temperature in the truck dropped until I could see my breath despite the heater running at full blast. My father responded to each event with actions that seemed practiced, ritualized. Salt along the window seals, a wooden cross hung from the mirror, holy water ready in its old glass bottle. We reached the toll station at 2:55, 5 minutes before 3. The station was completely deserted, abandoned in a way that felt wrong, felt staged, felt like a trap waiting to be sprung. My father parked and told me he needed to use the restroom. He would be 2 minutes. While he was gone, I was to remember the rules. Do not get out, do not open the door. Whatever I saw, it was not real. He left. I sat alone in the truck watching the clock tick toward 3. And then I saw her. She came from the darkness beyond the station lights, an old woman dressed entirely in black, shuffling forward with a strange, broken gait, dragging her feet as if her legs did not work properly. As she got closer, I could see her face, a mouth stretched impossibly wide, showing scattered teeth and blackened gums, a head tilted at an angle that should have been impossible, nearly 90 degrees, as if her neck had no bones. She came to the driver's side of the truck, disappeared below the window line. I heard her breathing wet and rattling and wrong. Then a knock, soft, almost polite. And then my mother's voice, perfect in every detail, in every inflection, in every note of warmth and love. "Mijo, let me in. It is cold out here. Open the door for your mother." My hand moved towards the door handle before my brain could stop it. That was my mother's voice. How could I not respond? How could I leave her outside in the cold? But my mother was in Mexico City. My mother was hundreds of kilometers away. I grabbed the cross and prayed. The scratching at the door continued. The voice pleaded. I kept my eyes closed and prayed harder. My father returned. He threw himself into the truck and drove away without explanation. In the mirror, I saw her standing where we had been parked, waving, smiling that terrible smile. The clock hit 3. What followed was an hour of pure terror. Shapes lined the highway, hundreds of them standing in rows like spectators at a parade, watching us pass with heads that turned to track our movement. I heard them whispering, "He has come, the marked one." My father prayed aloud and the shapes thinned, but they never disappeared entirely. Then came the child, a little boy standing in the middle of the road. 2 or 3 years old, white shirt, short pants, bare feet, crying for help. Every instinct I had screamed at me to save him. He was a baby, alone, helpless. How could I not help? My hand touched the door handle. My father grabbed my wrist hard enough to bruise. "That is not a child," he said. "Look at how it is standing." I looked. The boy was hovering a centimeter above the ground. His chest was not moving. His shadow stretched toward us instead of away. My father steered around it. The boy's head tracked us, rotating smoothly. And then his voice changed, became deep and layered and wrong. "I see you. You touched the door. You are mine now." I looked at my arm. 3 scratches had appeared running from wrist to elbow, deep and red and bleeding. The boy dropped to all fours and ran, like an animal, like a spider. Impossibly fast. He hit the back of the truck. I heard claws on metal scraping closer. He appeared at the windshield, crawling head first down from the roof. White skin, snake eyes, a mouth with too many teeth. "I see you," it said in my head. "I have always seen you. I stood in your room while you slept. You opened the door. You invited me in. I could not look away. Its eyes held mine, and I felt something being pulled out of me, something fundamental being seen and catalogued and remembered. My father threw the holy water. The thing screamed a sound beyond human hearing. Its skin smoked and bubbled. It fell away. We drove. The clock ticked past 3:50. My father pulled over and poured salt into my wounds. The pain was beyond description, but something inside me died, something that had gotten into my blood. At 4 o'clock, the darkness lifted. We drove home in exhausted silence. My mother was waiting. She held me and cried, asked if I had looked into their eyes. I had. She closed her eyes and prayed. She led me inside. I passed the hallway mirror and stopped. My reflection was wrong. It moved a fraction of a second after I did, and behind my reflected shoulder there was a small, dark shape, smiling. I spun around. Nothing there. "Do not look in mirrors," my mother said. "Not tonight. Mirrors show what is really there." The priest came the next day, performed rituals I did not understand. The shape in the mirror faded. My wounds became white scars. But every night at 3 in the morning I still wake up. Every year on that date my scars still bleed. 10 years passed. I followed the rules. Never drove during the dangerous hour. Never stopped for strangers. Never looked too long at shadows. Then 3 months ago, work forced me onto the road at night. I prepared carefully. Stopped at a well-lit gas station at 2:50, planning to wait out the hour. When I returned to my car, someone was standing beside it. A child, white shirt, short pants, bare feet. It turned to look at me. I recognized those eyes. It smiled. "I told you," it said. "I have been watching." Waiting. You cannot hide from me. The lights flickered. It vanished. But there was a handprint on my door and a white chrysanthemum in my back seat. That is why I tell you this. If you drive at night, if you find yourself alone when 3 o'clock comes, remember, do not stop. Do not open the door. Do not look into their eyes. Do not speak. Because once they see you, they never stop. They never forget. And if you are driving alone right now, do not look in your rearview mirror, because something might be in your back seat, something that was not there when you started. And if you see a face looking back at you, do not scream. Keep driving. Keep your eyes forward and pray. Pray that dawn comes quickly, because they are patient and they never forget a face.